What's up, guys? Welcome back. Yesterday I got the engine and transmission out of the car. I'm going to go ahead and remove the transmission and then start taking off some of these other parts to get ready to put it on this new motor and start getting this thing cleaned up. This must have been a Northern engine because it has a block heater on it. Plus it has some rust and corrosion on some of these metal parts, as you can see here, like on this bracket, some of these pulleys and some of the other components. So I want to get that cleaned up as much as possible. And then I need to remove the upper and lower oil pan and take the old oil pan off the old motor to put it onto the new motor. So I'm going to start working on that now. Alright guys, I started unbolting the transmission and the bell house here, but one thing I realized is there's a couple bolts underneath, so I may have to actually pick this motor up to get to those. I am not sure. I also took off the exhaust manifolds and I'm starting to unhook the wiring harness and some of these accessories just to kind of get everything out of the way. I'm going to need to move this wiring harness over to the new engine, as well as the exhaust manifold on the right hand side, because this one has been modified. It has this pipe that had been cut off and welded for the turbo system, and the exhaust manifold on the left hand side, it was missing the heat shield, which is not a big deal, but there's one thing I noticed here. There's actually a hole in this exhaust manifold. I have no idea why that would happen on what appears to be a factory exhaust manifold. I thought maybe these were aftermarket headers, but the new engine came with the same headers on it. So I'm going to have to use the exhaust manifold off the new engine, which is fine. One other thing I noticed, which is kind of strange, is on the right hand side we had this metal manifold gasket. Same on the new motor on the left hand side, but on the left hand side of this old motor, it's got this felt gasket on it, so I don't know why that's different. And a couple other things that I noticed was on this left hand side, the ports here looked pretty clean. This one here was a little dirtier, which is where that hole was in the exhaust manifold. But on the other side, you see in all of these ports here, there is oil and metal shavings. So obviously we know there's going to be metal shavings with this thing blowing up. I'm not sure why there would be oil on the right hand bank and not the left hand. But anyway guys, I'm going to continue pulling off this wiring harness and these accessories so I can put them onto the new motor. But first I'll need to set this motor down somewhere to be able to use my lift in order to be able to pick the motor up off the subframe. Alright guys, I got pretty much the entire wiring harness unhooked from everything, pulled off the power steering pump, getting ready to put that on a new motor, as well as the serpentine belt tensioner and several of these oil breather lines for the oil catch can. One other thing I'm noticing is that the motor mount on this motor here looks like it's going to be different than the one on this engine. As you can see, this one here, because of the all-wheel drive that this motor was hooked up to, this motor mount bracket is shaped differently, and the motor mount is further forward on this one right there in front of the alternator, versus on this one it's way behind the alternator. So that means I'm also going to have to take off that exhaust manifold, which I already mentioned anyway because the other one is different. And I'm gonna have to pull off this intake plenum to route the wiring harness and the fuel line that is used on this engine here. So I'll continue working on that, but for now, it's probably gonna wrap it up for me this afternoon. I still got to get some other things done today, and I've got some business stuff going on this week. I'm going to try to get back out here sometime this week in the afternoon, evening, to start working on this some more, and hopefully I can get this thing mounted up sometime this week and get ready to put it back into the car. Guys, got a couple more hours of work in here. So I removed the alternator and the power steering pump, as well as some other pulleys. I got those placed onto the new engine, and then I removed the harness for the alternator and the starter, put the oil cap off the old engine, the HKS oil cap on there, some of the breather tubes for the oil catch can, and removed some of the breather lines, vacuum lines for the throttle bodies and upper intake plenum. And I also removed the fuel return regulator. As you can see on this old motor, there was an aftermarket one that ran back to the return line. I'm going to probably go ahead and pull these spark plugs just to check the gap, because typically on a turbocharged application, the gap on the spark plugs will be reduced just to keep them from being blown out when they're trying to arc under pressure. It also gives me a better idea if the heads were hit by the pistons, and I could keep the coil packs if I wanted to. But yeah, just changing over a lot of parts, a lot of little tedious work right now. I also removed the motor mounts off the old motor. And so up next, I'm going to try to get this wiring harness removed, put that on the new motor, as well as some of these other coolant lines and breather lines that are in a lot better shape than what's on the new motor, because like I said, this new motor does have some rust on it. As you can see over here on these coolant lines, I'm going to replace this and this metal vacuum tubes that ran across the back here. I'm just trying to replace as much of that as possible. I'm trying to use the best parts from both engines. I'm probably going to take off these throttle bodies as well, as the old ones were much cleaner. And I was thinking I was going to have to remove this intake plenum. I may not have to do that. The only thing I saw was that fuel return line ran under there, but maybe I can thread that underneath. And I'm not really sure if any of the wiring harness lines go under there. I was thinking some of them did, but they may not actually. So anyway, a couple more things to figure out. I'm going to try to get a couple more hours in here this week to try to get this thing finished up so I can remove the motor from the subframe, and that way I can remove the transmission and get it bolted onto the new motor, and then set it all back onto the subframe. So yeah, still a little bit of work here to do, but I'll keep you guys updated. What's up, guys? So yesterday evening I got the throttle bodies put onto the intake plenum with some of the coolant, or vacuum lines rather, as well as the fuel return line put onto this motor. One other thing I want to take a look at is the fuel rails, in particular the injectors, because this motor being turbocharged most likely has larger injectors on it, so I need to pull those out, take a look at them, I'm also going to remove the spark plugs and take a look at those, and then go ahead and get this wiring harness off here so I can put it on the new motor. All right guys, I got the spark plugs out. These are from the old motor, these are from the new motor. Old motor had NGKs, which is what I prefer in a Japanese motor. I am not sure if these are a different heat rating because it was turbocharged, but I measured the gap on all of these, and the gap on these were measuring around 0.027. On the new motor, they're around 0.038. So that's kind of what I figured. Typically, you lower the gap on a turbocharged motor. I'm probably going to go ahead and order some new spark plugs, as the ones that came out of the new motor are Denzos. I'm not necessarily opposed to Denso. I know they're supposed to be good as well, but like I said, I prefer NGK, plus I want to make sure I got the correct heat rating. And these look like they have maybe a little bit of heat or possibly corrosion around them. You know, 50,000 miles. They may last 100,000, but you do have to take a bunch of stuff off the motor in order to get to the spark plug, so I figure I might as well do that while it's out. Another thing I noticed is the spark plug here in this cylinder, this is cylinder number 3, was just extremely tight, or not extremely tight, but very tight. And I kept cranking on it, but it just did not want to come out. And so I think this must be the cylinder that failed, and it kind of makes sense when you look at the other side of the motor where the hole in the block is. So because of that, I was only able to get 5 of the spark plugs out. I would have probably used the spark plugs in this old motor if I could have got them all out, but I wasn't able to. But that's all right. I'll go ahead and get some new ones, like I said. And then I'm probably going to use the coil packs from the old motor, just because I know this motor had less mileage on it and there was less corrosion and stuff like that on those. So I'm going to use those on the new motor. All right guys, I got the fuel rail removed off the new motor. Man, this new motor, there's just so much corrosion on it. Everything is so hard to get off. Breaking nuts and bolts and everything, but finally got that out of there. So I did get the fuel rail off the old motor, and I did pull one of these injectors, and yeah, this is what I thought. These are aftermarket injectors, Injector Dynamics. Yeah, so that's definitely aftermarket. I also got the wiring harnesses off the motor and transmission. A little more work than I thought, but that's all right. So now I need to remove the injectors from the old motor and transfer them over to the new motor. But like I said, there's some corrosion and stuff here. And so I'm thinking about taking off this lower intake plenum just to clean things up, because the injector that was in this port right here was so corroded in there that it nearly broke coming out, and you can't even see any real clean metal on that. And obviously I don't want to clean it while it's on the motor. Don't want to drop debris down into the motor. What I may do is just pull off the plenum off the old motor and put it on the new motor, because it is a lot cleaner. So that's something I got to think about. I need to get a list of parts made, get some things ordered, and then I'll get back on this sometime this week. I'm not sure. I'm going to hit up tomorrow. Still working on some other business stuff, and got some other things coming up later this weekend, but I'll keep you updated on my progress. All right guys, I got the lower intake plenum switched over from the old motor, since it was a lot cleaner, and the fuel injector ports on the new motor were kind of corroded and stuff. It was just a lot easier than trying to clean everything up. Got the fuel injectors in, fuel rails, spark plugs are properly gapped and set in place, and the fuel return line is in place. Now I'm going to get the wiring harness and start hooking it up and putting it on. Then I can move on to getting the headers bolted on, as well as the motor mounts, as soon as I unhook the old motor from the subframe.
got the wiring harness on, got the upper intake plenum on, the breather hoses, and some of the coolant lines. This one coolant line I had over here, I went ahead and took it off because it was rusted, but I did notice that there was a difference on the new motor versus the old motor. I went ahead and put this stuff back on the old motor just so it's all together when I get it out of here, but this only had 2 lines on it, whereas what came on this old motor actually had 3 lines coming out of it. And there's a couple other little tubes here, some coolant passages that run over to this oil filter housing, so I'll have to take those off, transfer those over to the new motor as well whenever I do the oil pans. I still got to get the one exhaust manifold off. A couple bolts broke on it, or actually I just can't get them out. They're slightly smaller than the 10 mils that were here, but the next size down doesn't fit these, and metric doesn't fit them, and they just want to try and round off, so I'm going to have to get creative, cut those off somehow. And then when I get my manifold gaskets, I can put the exhaust headers back on from the old motor, and then after that, pretty much I'll be ready to take this motor off the subframe finally. So I plan to work on that some more this coming week. It's Saturday evening. I doubt I'm gonna work on this tomorrow. It's possible, but yeah, just kind of feeling worn out this week, so I just take tomorrow off and rest a little bit, get the house cleaned up. Anyway, guys, I'll keep you updated. All right, guys, I told myself I was gonna take a little break today because yesterday I was feeling really tired, but here I am, couldn't keep my hands off things. So I finally got the exhaust manifold off. It took some work. The heat shield bolts were corroded, and so I had to cut those off. And then the gasket surface had a little corrosion on it, so I just got all that cleaned up on both sides. And over here, I also removed a couple more little brackets and things, such as this vent tube here. Got that off for the differential, and just getting everything out of the way so I can finish up putting this wiring harness on. So next up is pretty much get this motor lifted up and get it separated from the subframe so that I can finish unbolting the transmission and get it off. Then I got to get the motor mounts off this old motor, put those on the new motor, and then that way I'll be able to reinstall the exhaust manifolds. And I just want to get everything here cleaned up. The oil cap that they had on this, I had like a dual O-ring, which I think they must have just thrown an extra O-ring on or something, because one wasn't supposed to be there, which was causing oil to leak all over everything and just making everything down here a mess. So I want to get all that cleaned up as well as the suspension and everything. I'm just going to give this a quick scrub down with a little soap and water. Then I can get the new motor over here in place and get ready to hook up the transmission to that.